Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Xiaoxia Gong. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Sociology at Harvard University. I'm also the chairperson of the Board of Directors at the China Information Center, an organization established last May dedicated to the freedom of information and the promotion of humanistic value in China. I'm here to offer a case for the renewal of the most favored nation status for China. I realized when people raised the issue of removing the MFN to China, their major concern is the human rights situation in the country. Doubtlessly, the current situation in China since the brutal massacre last June is dreadful. Thousands of the demonstrators in the pro-democracy movement have been arrested, many of them tortured, some of them even executed. Among those who were arrested, some are my very close friends and schoolmates. Moreover, the Chinese government has set up a series of new regulations which restrict free flow of information and the free immigrant. So I fully respect the effort of those Chinese students and the congressmen to promote the cause of human rights in China. The difference is not over the eventual goals, but over relative merits of different tactics and the cost of different courses of action we want to take. There is no question that the current Chinese leadership has attempted to reverse the course of gradual political and economic openness that China undertook for 10 years since 1978. But in our judgment, their efforts to crack down on dissent and to reverse the reformist course have not been completely successful. One of the most important reasons is that China today, compared with the dark Orwellian world of Mao Zedong, is much more open to the outside world. Therefore, we should make every effort to keep China's doors open. Keeping China's doors open will provide us with leverage to positively influence future developments and to prevent an already bad human rights situation in China from going worse. The MFN status for China constitutes one of the most important components of keeping China's doors open. We offer the following reasons to support the renewal of MFN status for China. First, keeping China's doors open is the best means of restraining political repressions in China. Here, I can offer my personal experiences. In 1974, my friends and I conducted an investigation in Guangdong province about political persecutions and human rights abuses. We found that in only one province, that's in Guangdong, between mid-1966 to late 1968, 42,000 innocent people were executed without the protection of any legal procedures. At that time, our only wish was to find a way to release the information to the outside world. At that time, we failed because then China's doors was tightly closed and we paid a dear price. Some of my friends were put behind bars for conducting this investigation. I remember one 5 years and the other 7 years. And I was put into the jail later. On April 5th, 1976, also on Tiananmen Square, the then Chinese leadership unleashed armed police to suppress the massive popular demonstration. There was no Western camera to capture the ferocity of the crackdown because China's doors were closed. As a result, even to this day, even today, nobody knows or has a rough estimate of how many people were killed, executed, or jailed for participating in the demonstration. That's in 1976. The Chinese communist regime has a history of political repressions. Tiananmen Square massacre in June 1989 was only one of the many heinous crimes of the Chinese government committed against these people. However, the critical difference of this crime with the previous ones is that it was committed in front of the world. To be more accurate, I should say, in front of the cameras of the world. As a result, we know many of the names of those thrown into jail, and we have a rough estimate of the number of deaths in the crackdown. Furthermore, new ideas and new values introduced to China through open door policy have made it very difficult for the Chinese government to carry out its campaign of lies and have made a sustained repression very difficult. So it is the openness that makes such a great difference. For this reason, the first thing the Chinese government did after the massacre was to close the door of China by expelling the brave foreign reporters. If we do want to punish the murderers, the best way, I think, is to force them to keep the door open. Secondly, we believe that revoking China's MFN may affect leadership dynamics in China in ways detrimental to forces of political moderation and democratic aspirations. We must realize that the current leadership is deeply divided. To apply excessive foreign pressures at this time may unite an otherwise divisive leadership. Worse yet, isolating China may benefit such conservatives as Chen Yun and Li Peng. These are the leaders who have thrived on xenophobia and a total rejection of Western ideas. Removing MFN will legitimize conservatives' efforts to re-centralize the economy and to agitate an anti-foreign sentiment by blaming all the problems on foreigners. Thirdly, MFN removal will have a very serious detrimental effects on the sector of the Chinese economy that may prove to be an effective agent for future political changes in China. Specifically, I'm here referring to the private and quasi-private enterprises that have grown very rapidly in China's coastal area, including my hometown, Guangdong, in recent years, and which are extremely dependent on export markets. Demolition of China's private sector will have long-term political implications. Private entrepreneurs are the most ardent supporters of freedom and democracy. Furthermore, from the experiences of Eastern European countries, we learned that successful transition from authoritarianism to democracy will ultimately depend on the success of converting a centrally planned economy to a market economy. That conversion, in turn, depends on the existence of private entrepreneurship and the size of private sector in the economy. Fourthly, we believe in non-violent political transformations. And we believe that one of the best ways of achieving changes in a peaceful manner is to keep China's doors open and keep our links with the moderate and the reformist faction in the Chinese leadership. People may argue that the removal of the MFN would result in a sharp reduction in living standards in China and thus would possibly lead to another people's rebellion. The current regime can be toppled. I myself hate this regime as much as any other Chinese do, if not more. Being a political dissident in China for 16 years, I suffered a lot in the political campaigns and even in prison for my ideas and the longing for freedom and democracy. However, under the communist rule, the Chinese people have already suffered too much in political coercion, turmoil, famine, shortage, and most recently, corruption, and inflation. If the removal of MFN could indeed lead to a violent overthrow to the government, which I doubt very much, I'm worried that the Chinese people would pay a terrible high price both in human and in economic terms. Also, achieving change through violence can create deep wounds that take a long time to heal. Witness the recent chaos and difficulties in Romania and the contrast between Romania and other East European countries. The critical difference is that other Eastern European countries achieved political and economic changes gradually and peacefully. We should exert every effort to ensure that future changes in China will not be violent. Considering the current political and economic realities in China, we support a moderate policy approach toward China. We do not view the trade relationships of the United States with China strictly in dollar terms. More appropriately, they are windows of opportunities for fostering seeds of future political changes in China and for bringing about these changes in gradual and peaceful manner. However, to be moderate does not necessarily mean to tolerance of the inhuman suppression by the Chinese government of its own people. We believe that we can take a moderate stance on MFN issue, but a strong and effective position in human rights. We suggest that the following measures that will enable the United States to take a position on China's human rights situation without disrupting MFN. First, the American business community should refuse to do business with the municipal leadership of Beijing. Mayor Chen Xitong and the party secretary Li Ximing played an instrumental role in providing justification for the crackdown and executing the crackdown. Secondly, if the human rights situation in China fails to improve, there should be efforts to establish ethical guidelines similar to Sullivan principles on doing business in China. For example, these guidelines can encourage business with relatively liberal and progressive coastal provinces while discouraging business with the conservative Beijing government. Thirdly, World Bank loans, in addition to being subject to the basic human needs test, can be used to advance economic reforms in China. For example, some of the loans for the infrastructural projects can be converted to policy and institutional support loans, which make disbursement conditional upon such reform measures as enterprise and price reforms. If condition must be attached to the renewal of MFN, we should make sure that these conditions will not be so sweeping and unrealistic as to make revocation of MFN inevitable. We suggest the following criteria for coming up with conditions. First, these conditions must be practical. Namely, they must only demand concessions that the Chinese leadership has demonstrated in the past that it is willing to make. Secondly, these conditions must demand concessions about which the Chinese leadership itself is divided. Thirdly, these conditions must be verifiable. Using these criteria, we suggest that a general call for the release of political prisoners and the release of information about them be made the only condition we attach to the renewal of MFN. Finally, I would like to add the last but most important fact. 2 students in Peking University a month ago posted an article against economic sanction, and they were arrested by the Chinese government. Those students risked their lives to deliver us a message. We mustn't ignore it. Thank you.